Hello and welcome to the latest edition of the Serious About Rugby League show. This is our weekly review slot where we talk about last weekend's games and any news that's cropped up over the past week or so. I'm joined, as always, by Sam Broxham and Sam Cook from Serious About Rugby League, and I'm Peter Smith of the Yorkshire Evening Post. If you've watched this show before, you'll know I'm going to say, please, could you like this video and subscribe to the channel, because that really helps us. And I want to say a big thank you to everybody who has. We've just reached 1,000 subscribers, which, considering we started this show not so long ago, is a good achievement, and we really appreciate all your support. So thank you very much for that. Looking back on last weekend, interesting round of fixtures in Betfred Super League, starting with Huddersfield Giants against St Helens on Thursday night. That was 26-18 to Saints. They went top of the table. On Friday, we had Wakefield Trinity 58, Catalans Dragons 10, and Wigan Warriors 24, Leeds Rhinos, who were previously top, 4. On Saturday, York Knights 18, Castleford 24, Toulouse Olympique 16, Warrington Wolves 24, Leigh Leopards 16, Hull KR 20, and on Sunday, Bradford Bulls 16, Hull FC 14. I think the big game of the week was at Wigan, where, as I've mentioned, Rhinos were the visitors and were well beaten, 4-1 in quite a one-sided contest, actually. Sam Broxham, you watched that one. What did you make of it? Do you think Wigan are over their blip, and do Leeds actually have some problems that we maybe weren't aware of before that game?
Yeah, I think Wigan have certainly turned the corner. They obviously lost 4 league games in a row and then beat Bradford before that Challenge Cup game against Saints. Won against Saints and then beat Leeds in, as you said, in quite convincing fashion. Leeds didn't post a point until well after the hour mark. Mosivo doing what he does best, but I think that's also kind of one of his limiting factors, is that all he does is kind of score tries. He don't really offer a lot else, which is kind of one of his big criticisms. Wigan were just far better on the day. Jack Farman was class in the halves. To say he's only 20 years old, he kind of guided the team around. Harry Smith as well. In that battle between two, you'd think, potentials for the World Cup, England, Harry Smith and Jake Connor. Harry Smith certainly won that battle. He just controlled the game, and neither Brodie Croft or Jake Connor could kind of get a foothold. And I think Wigan have turned a corner. I think they've beaten the league's top 2 in the last 2 weeks, and it's a good sign for Matt Peake when they've got a Challenge Cup final in a fortnight's time, and a game against Hull KR later this week. And it's just called positive at the Brick Community Stadium. You mentioned problems for Leeds. I don't think there's that many problems for Leeds. I think they've won 5 in a row. They've had a setback. I think Wigan's, I won't really call it their bogey team, but I think Wigan away especially is a place that Leeds find hard to go, and it showed again. I don't think they've won since 2023, and I think they'll be all right. I think I think they've got Huddersfield this week, a game next week, and then a break for the Challenge Cup. So they've got like a mini period here to kind of get back on the horse, get 2 wins before that break, and then they can kind of push on for the rest of the season. And I think no worrying signs for Leeds just yet.
You said something interesting there. Well, I mean, it was all interesting, Sam, but you said something I want to pick up on about Mosivo, because he's actually getting a lot of criticism on the lines that you've just mentioned, that all he does is score tries. But he's got 20 tries this season, 18 in Super League and 2 in the Challenge Cup, and we've only played 11 Super League rounds. Do you think, Sam Cook, do you think that's a valid criticism of him? Because he's a winger, he's paid to score tries. I know there's 2 sides to the game, and he's caught out positionally occasionally, as he was against Wigan, but surely he's scoring a lot more tries than he's conceding. I think people have been a little bit unfair to him. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I think it's probably just a contrast. And obviously, the way he starts the season, everyone's like, oh my God, look at this guy. He's the best winger we've ever seen. And obviously now the tries, they're still coming, but they're not coming at a rate of 3 per game as they were. And I think obviously the error for the Farriman tries is quite a substantial one. But I think it is potentially just a case of what the expectations were, and people kind of created a heightened sense of what Mike Mosivo could do. I think there is not questions, but I think you'd probably like a little bit more from him out of backfield. That's me personally. I watch Hawkeye a lot, and Tom Davies, Tom Davies has maybe only got about 6 tries this season, but I'd argue that he probably makes about 170 metres a game because he carries that backfield very strong. Mike Mosivo, I think, maybe needs a little bit more of that. And I think, but again, there's no stopping him inside 20 metres, and that's where the bulk of his game is played. So I think it is probably a little bit unfair, but I also think it's probably just a case of, did we all get a bit too far ahead of ourselves? We were talking, 40, 50 tries. Could he be a Man of Steel winner? And well, maybe not, but he's a winger and he's scoring tries, and that's what he's paid to do, as you say. So I think the criticism's a little bit unfair, but I can understand why people have had the sort of change in opinion. But again, it's just, I think people are fickle out there. Fans are fickle, so it's natural for that sort of shift to happen, I'd say.
As I've said also on Friday night, we had quite a startling final outcome at Wakefield, who beat Catalans 58-10. I think it was 10-0 to Catalans early on and only 10-10 at half-time. So they scored 48 points in the second half, which is some effort, whoever you're playing. Sam Cook, again, you watched that one. Tell us about it, please.
Yeah, Catalans started really bright as well. They sort of targeted Wakefield's right edge. Mason Lena was on that edge. Cam Scott was actually in the second row on that edge. And at about 15 minutes after, seeing 2 tries come down that side, Darryl Powell makes the change and he brings off Cam Scott. He made it clear that it was no fault of Cam Scott. He just kind of wanted to get a few more bigger bodies on there. And the bigger bodies, whilst it wasn't an immediate turnaround, they grew into the game and then got themselves level. And the second half was brilliant from Wakefield and just appalling, really, from Catalans. I think you look at soft tries and there are so many. I think the Kais Fatilli, the second one in particular, he's about 10 metres out with 3 men on him and he ends up they take him down to his knees and he still manages to crawl over from 5 metres out. It's impressive from him, but again, from Catalans, it's really, really poor. And I think it was just once Wakefield I think they scored 2 early ones in the second half, and from that point, it was just floodgates had gone. And I think Darryl Powell needs a lot of credit for making the changes he did. Fatilli, Tavanga came on, made an impact. Lalesia, sorry. There's another one, Hamlin Uele. They all came on and made a big impact. But the bigger talking point has got to be how Catalans just completely folded. And I think Ryan Sheridan's kind of come out and said that it was disgraceful and you can't happen. But I don't know that there's any solutions really. Against Leigh, whilst they didn't fold against Leigh, they had a lead in that game and they ended up losing quite comfortably 33-18 at home. And, it's one thing losing away, but they're losing at home as well now. And I think they're already 4 points outside the 6. And you look at who's in the 6 and you wonder, well, you don't really see anyone dropping out. So it's kind of what happens this season for Catalans. They've got a lot of players on 1-year deals, a lot of players going back to the NRL already, including like Toby Sexton. I just think with no permanent coach and with no real sort of long-term goals on, Cruz Lehman's only a 1-year loan. I just think it's a bit of a worry for Catalans, and you could say that a lot of it comes down to the fact that it's finally caught up to them having to pay their way over the top of odds in terms of paying for English clubs and stuff. And I think maybe that's something that he's looking at. Obviously, there's the NRL deal that's maybe lingering in the background. What do they think of Catalans? We know that they like the French teams, they want to expand. So do they maybe give more, like, we've seen obviously with PNG, they've been given tax relief for their squad, the Catalans get some sort of travel relief because they're having to pay through the nose, and it's ultimately it's affecting them. All they've been able to recruit is sort of Q Cup and New South Wales Cup players, and it's worked for some teams, but at the moment it's just not working for Catalans. And I think, you know, Friday night's result kind of reflects that. They just, when the going got tough, they just folded a little bit, which it's characteristics, but it's also squad, and I think that's where they maybe need some help long term.
On Saturday, I went to York, which is my local club, to watch them play Castleford Tigers in quite an intriguing battle at the bottom of the table. And York were leading in that one at half time, but didn't score a point in the second half. And Castleford got home probably with a little bit more comfortably than the 24-18 scoreline suggests. I thought Cas were poor in the second quarter when they went from 12-6 up to 18-12 behind. But second half, they dominated most of it. Having conceded 50 points in the two previous games, they kept a clean sheet in the second half. And I think they'll take a fair bit of confidence from that they were a team that were desperately in need of a win. There's no doubt about that. Sam Broxton, do you think Cas can sort of go on a little bit of a run now? I mean, they've got Saints next, so it's going to be very tough. But do you think the win at York will give them just a bit of incentive for the second half of the season, a bit of momentum and something to build on?
Well, you'd like to think so, but you know, the one that was their fourth win. You know, we've said it the first three times that they've won as well, and it's not getting the win that's the problem. It's the backing it up and being consistent. You know, they beat Wigan at Wigan, and then they lose for the following week, and it's just incredibly inconsistent. And you know, Castleford needed that win, but it's backing it up this week, and there's the problem. And you know, the new signings that they've brought in, PLT and Tyler Dupree, have certainly bolstered that squad. And you know, you'd like to think that finally they can, you know, kind of put a little bit of a run together. As we mentioned with Leeds, you know, they'll have one more game before that break, and you think if they could win these two games, then maybe that they can put a run together. But I just think it's incredibly inconsistent, and that's kind of Ryan Carr's biggest issue at the minute with the squad. And the big point that Ryan Carr has to prove is not just winning against a York, it's winning and then backing it up the following week, which is what they've not been able to do in the early part of the season. And I think that's the big issue or big task for Ryan Carr. And I think if he can do that this week, as I go check who they have, St Helens, which is obviously a big task. You know, you'd expect them not to get the win there, but you'd think if an improved performance and a performance where they're at least in with a chance of winning for the majority of the game, you think that would be a big improvement and something that Ryan Carr would be striving for.
You mentioned Phoenix PLT, Phoenix Laulu-Togaga'e. There, he had a tough debut. He's joined them recently from Catalans. Had a tough debut against Hull KR a couple of weeks ago, but I thought he was very good against York. Probably the best player on the pitch. I'm not sure who got the official man of the match, but he was really lively, didn't make mistakes, made a lot of ground with the ball, looked like a good addition to me. Sam Cook, do you think he's a good signing?
Yeah, I think he offers loads of versatility as well. He's only very small, but I think he competes a lot, and I think you can probably play him anywhere across the back line. You know, he didn't really get much of a chance at Hull KR. They loaned him out, but he was, I think, Oldham's Player of the Year in League One. He continued being strong in the Championship, and I think at Catalans, I wasn't sure how much of a role he played, but you know, he came to play a relatively big role. Played a bit in the centres for them, and Cas have obviously made, you know, a 3-year deal that they're clearly keen, and you can understand why when you watch that performance. I think under the high bar, I was actually surprised with, you know, how impressive he was. He looked very comfortable for someone who's, like I said, been playing in the centre, so he's not necessarily had loads of game time at fullback. And I think in terms of just the meters, like you mentioned, that's something that they've not had because they've had to change fullbacks. Obviously, they've had the Blake Taff injury and then Fletcher Rooney as well. So I think it was kind of for now, he's obviously going to play fullback, but then for the next couple of years when you've got Taff and Rooney back, he can kind of just fill in anywhere. And I think players like that, coaches love because it's so dependable. We'll come on to obviously Jack Broadbent for Hull KR is similar style of player. They're maybe not identical, but in terms of the fact that they can do a little bit of everything across the back line, at a good level as well, it's perfect for a coach. And in a Super League season where, you're going to pick up injuries as we've seen this year.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned Jack Broadbent there and Hull KR winning 20 points to 16 at Leigh. Quite a tense finale to that one. Sam Cook, you watched that game for us. What did you make of it?
I thought it was a really good game. I thought it was a really, really good game. I think it's one of the games I've enjoyed. I think sometimes you can watch games and they can pass you by, especially with all the captain's challenges. But actually, thankfully, Hull KR wasted their captain's challenge early in the second half, and we kind of got saved from that a little bit. And that was actually, it just meant that the fatigue stayed in the game, and I think that's why you get such a chaotic ending. So I think if there's ever an advert for scrapping the captain's challenge, then that last half an hour is definitely it. Leigh really got a roll, and I think that's a sign that I mentioned earlier. Catalans are 4 points outside the top six. Well, Leigh are as well, and on form, whilst obviously they've lost this game, you would think that Leigh have got a good shot at making that top six, but it's a case of who drops out because there's a lot of strong teams in there. But they were very close. I mean, there's a couple of try savers in there from Hull KR who were hanging on towards the end. It was very reminiscent of the Brisbane Broncos game in the World Cup Challenge. They put the foot down in just the final 10 minutes of the first half. Actually, they scored all three of their tries then, and then Leigh started getting a little bit of momentum, and the crowd there helped. I think we've said a lot before about how much crowds can help. You look at a team like Huddersfield where they might get 4K in a 24K stadium, and even when they get a bit of momentum, the crowd, whilst they'll be loud, they're not quite. It's just not the atmosphere. Leigh had more or less sold out there. I think there was 9,000 in there at the LSV, and you really felt that. And I think Leigh took that onto the pitch, and they came so close. But I think Adrian Lamb and the club, they'll take so much from that in terms of we can really compete with these top teams. And I think once they get maybe 2 or 3 games together where they've actually got that full strength squad, I think they're going to be flying, to be honest. And I think we've seen it a couple of years ago where they had to win maybe like 11 of the last 13 to make the 6. And I think whilst they're not quite in that desperate territory yet, they do need to catch up a little bit. And I wouldn't be surprised if they do based on that performance.
The injury to Arthur Mourgue, he started, I believe, with Jack Broadbent on the bench. Wembley, less than 2 weeks away now. How's that going to affect their preparations, do you think?
I mean, in a sense, they're back to where they were, aren't they, really? They played 11 weeks without Arthur Mourgue, and it looks like it could be, well, we're hoping it's not as long, but it looks to be the same injury. Whether it's just, again, you got to hope it's not a bad one because he's obviously worked so hard to get back, and, has been such a talent for him. And he missed that on Wembley last year because of the fact he was cup tied. He's probably going to miss that this year based on this injury, and he could miss a lot longer in the season. But I think in terms of preparation, it kind of has to be, as horrible and harsh as it sounds, it kind of has to be, well, let's just keep focused on what we were doing before he was back. It's a bit almost unchanged, which sounds brutal, but I'm sure that they can do that whilst also rallying around him, because he's going to need a lot of support, because that is devastating. Because he was having a good game as well. He scored a try. And actually, Leigh, to be fair, at the start of the game, just with how physical they were, and their kicking game really tested him. But he stood up to the test, gets his try, and then it's just a freak injury. I think, some people said, oh, is he come back too early? And it's just, I don't think that's the case. I think it's just, he does it in the act of making a tackle, and his kind of arm, and he's stretching out, and it just gets extended, and you just hope it's just a sore one rather than anything more serious. But I think KR are getting scans this week, so we'll see. But in terms of Wembley preparation, it's just Chad Broadbent again, and I think it's not a bad replacement to have, really.
Last game of the weekend was at Odsal on Sunday. As we mentioned, Bradford 16, Hull 14. And I've seen people saying what a terrible game it was. I actually quite enjoyed it. I don't know whether that makes me weird, but the first half, very cagey. Only penalty goals. It opened up a bit in the second half. And there was a quite bizarre incident fairly soon after the break, which saw Yusuf Aydin sent off for, I'm not sure what you'd call it. It was a professional wrestling style throw. Probably the clearest red card you'll see this season. Bradford took advantage of that and managed to win the game. I think that's their fourth win at Odsal this season. And for Hull, it completed a notable achievement. They've managed to lose to all three promoted teams now, York, Bradford and Toulouse. So that's an achievement for them. Sam B, you watched that. What do you make of it?
Yeah, it was far from a classic, but yeah, I don't think there was any. There was more than one score in it between the two teams at any point, so it was quite close, and I think that's what made it as entertaining as it is, as you kind of mentioned it. And it was entertaining. It wasn't, it wasn't maybe the quality of the whole KR and Leigh game that Sam mentioned earlier, but for for entertainment and kind of drama that it kind of portrayed with the red card and everything like that, it was certainly a good to watch, and Bradford will take real confidence out of that. I think Kurt Haggerty mentioned it post match that they played better than that and lost, and that they play quite poorly to Haggerty's standards, and they come up with a win, and yeah, it's kind of a bit of a turning point, and yeah, you'd think that they'd be able to push on. For Hull FC, I think kind of questions do need to be asked. I think you mentioned that they've lost to all three promoted sides. Well, two of them have come in the last two games. They lost to Toulouse a fortnight ago, and then they lose to Bradford here, and it's kind of worrying signs for Andy Last. He's got the season, and then Steve McNamara comes in on a long-term deal, and you think that that's kind of the rebuild that they need. But for the 2026 season, it's kind of you need something to change, and I don't really see what that is. You've got a mountain injury list. I think over half the salary cap's on the stands. They've lost even more players to that. In this game, Brad Fash has done his MCL. Davy Litton, Lewis Martin are both concerns for next week, and you just think the players that they're losing, you just think that something's. Yeah, it's just you don't see where the next win comes from, and you think that. Yeah, it's a tough time for Hull FC, and you'd hope that they improve, but I'm not sure I see that in the immediate future. And just on that red card, it was I think dangerous throw will be what the match review panel will call it. But Will Price did it for Huddersfield, did a similar incident a few years ago, and he got a 10-match ban. But that was obviously the old disciplinary system. You'd think maybe. You'd think that Aydin would get kind of the highest ban possible, which I think highest grade possible, which is I think grade F. So I don't know how many points that is, but you'd expect a lengthy charge for the Hull FC man.
Yeah, watched it a few times. I just don't know what he was trying to do. I don't think he was trying to hurt the opponent. He put his hands up sort of straight away. Yeah, I've messed up there. But it was really extraordinary. Have you seen it, Sam Cooks? And what did you make of it?
Yeah, and what I actually think, not necessarily makes it worse, but I actually think there's going to be two charges, because he comes in with a shoulder charge first, doesn't he? When Akins is on the floor, then kind of gets onto him, and he just seems frustrated that Akins is refusing to go down, and obviously wants to stay on his feet for a quick play of the ball, and he just, I'm not sure how you describe it, a body slam, I don't know, he's out of wrestling, and I think, like you say, he holds his hand up straight away, and I think probably wonders what the hell he's doing, because you're probably not going to see him now until July. Probably you're looking at 6 matches at least, I'd say, and all for just again, just a head loss moment. There's another example when Sam mentioned the Will Price one. I think Hugo Salabio, who's also at Hull FC now, did it to Richie Myler, who obviously the Hull FC director of rugby now, I think did that for Wakefield in, I think, 23 maybe. And I think he, again, that was an old system, but he got a lengthy ban. So there's no way he's avoiding a ban. It's probably just how long it is. And obviously, as you mentioned with the injuries, how are Hull FC going to potentially survive? They've spoke about recruitment, but I think now the recruitment's got to be a bit expedited because they're lacking really in the park. There's not many left, it seems.
I wish you'd not mentioned that Hugo Salabio thing, Sam. That was I think Wakefield's first win in 15 or 16 matches a couple of years ago when
it was a good game on it. Yeah,
they had him sent off, and Leeds somehow managed to lose the game quite.
But the weird one for that one was Salabio was in possession.
I was just going to say that he was. That was the difference. He actually had the ball quite. I've never seen anything like that one. But I think he's Salabio at Hull now.
Yeah, he's at Hull now. Yeah, I think he's been loaned out to Halifax at times this season, but I'm not sure. But again, if he's still at Hull, he might have to be the man who comes in, obviously with a Fash injury and Aydin obviously likely bound. So you might see him in a couple of weeks. He don't play Leeds, does he, in a couple of weeks' time? I don't know.
No, not. If you've not seen that, by the way, I'd look it up on. I'm sure it'll be on YouTube. It really is. It's quite something. That's it as far as matches at the weekend go. I think in terms of news over the past week or so, the big story has been concerning Leeds and Warrington and Brodie Croft. As we're recording this, we've actually just had an announcement from the Rhinos. They've put a press release out that confirms that standoff Brodie Croft is leaving the club at the end of the 2026 Bradford Super League season. It says Croft's management informed the club last week that he had agreed a deal for 2027 and beyond with another club and will therefore end his 3 seasons out the Rhinos at the completion of this season. It goes on to quote Sporting Director Ian Blease saying, "Naturally, this was disappointing news for us to hear from Brodie's management. My relationship with Brodie goes back a long way, having first brought him to Super League with Salford back in 2022. It adds, still quoting Ian Blease, "I've been in discussions with him and his team for over 6 months to try and keep him at IMT Headingley. I understand from Brodie that it is not a financial decision, but the fact he wants, with 3 young children, to play his rugby closer to his home in the Northwest. All parties have tried to work on ways around this, but at the end of the day, Brodie has made the decision he feels is right for himself and his family, and I fully respect that." Sam B. Worrying times for Leeds in terms of the number of people leaving?
Yeah, and you look at Ryan Hall, who's I think 38, and Callum Watkins is I think 36, mid 30s at least, and you wonder. I don't think Ryan Hall will go around again. I think Ryan Hall's he's a club legend, but I think the performance at Wigan kind of highlighted that he's maybe gone a season too far, and I feel like that it's harsh, but I think it's times like these where club fans of club legends kind of need to put the nostalgia aside and just kind of say, your time's up, and it's we appreciate what you've done for the club, but I do think Leeds needs to look somewhere younger, especially in that wing department. Watkins, you maybe go around again. We're not sure, but yeah, I think 5 players leaving. It's a huge recruitment drive for 2027, and Ian Blease has said previously that some recruitment's already done for 2027. Whether that factored in a Croft departure at the time, you don't know. But you think that you'd need a new halfback. When he does go, George Brown is kind of tipped to be the next young, homegrown halfback to pair maybe Jake Connor. But I think in the meantime, I think Brown kind of needs another year to develop. So I think they do need to bring someone in. Jackson Hastings has been rumoured, but I just don't see that working. I think Connor and Hastings are kind of similar in the sense that they're both controlling halfbacks. They both want to guide that team, and I think two big egos in the team will just clash. I don't think that'll work. But yeah, it's worrying. But I think if Leeds get it right, I think they'll be all right. Obviously hindsight will be a wonderful thing when we get to this time next year, and we'll see what signings they've made and whether it's worthwhile. But yeah, at the minute, I think Ian Blease is under a lot of pressure to get this right, and if he doesn't, it then might start reflecting on the fans, and they might see a kind of a different side to Blease, who at the minute is since he's been at Leeds has been great with the recruitment. He's brought in the likes of Cooper Jenkins, who Q Cook, and he's now one of the bigger forwards in Leeds' pack, and he's making a real difference. And recruitment like that has been really good. But yeah, I think this recruitment cycle is really big for Leeds.
Sam Cook, is he a good signing for Warrington?
I think he's a good signing, but I think at the moment you could assume they'll have to be overpaying him in reference to the fact that last year was probably the perfect time to sign Brodie Croft. He had a bit of by his standards, a bit of a down year. Obviously, Jake Connor was kind of the man. Obviously, Lockie Miller was also flying. I think Croft kind of was a little bit in reserve, etc. But now, they've come in for him, and I think is he 13 in the first 9? I'm not sure where he sits now with tries, but I know he's double figures for tries, and I think he's probably one of the form halves. And you assume with that, Warrington and Egg4 are going to have to pay that a little bit more. If he can replicate that at Warrington, then it's probably good value. But I think we all know that a lot of the time, players in contract years will perform above their standards sometimes, and then it may dip down. I think there's nothing to suggest that necessarily will be the case, because at Warrington he's going to go in to a good team. It's interesting to see where he plays alongside Irwin. Is Irwin going to be given the keys as the number 7, and you let Croft play 6? I think you have to let Croft play 6, but is Irwin then ready to be the 7, the sort of general? Because Mark Sneed's off contract, Ollie Leyland's off contract, I think. So I think it's a good signing, but I think it's interesting what Warrington do alongside it, because Croft and Irwin could be unbelievable. It's just whether they've never been, to be fair, they've never actually backed out of showing faith in young players. So I do probably think they will play Irwin at 7, but it's a big task to be the starting 7 at who will be 19 next year, I think. But yeah, I think for Leeds it's now all down to Brad Arthur. Brad Arthur's contract is up famously, as it was last year. I think he's looking at this squad now thinking, well, I don't have 5 of my starters from this year, potentially more. Do I really want to be involved? So I think, Ian Blease is not just having to appease the fans and stuff. I think he's also going to have to appease Brad Arthur.
Yep. It will be very interesting to see how that turns out. I think Leeds disappointed to be losing Croft, but not surprised. The bitter pill from them is the fact he's going to another Super League club, but I think they were aware that there was a very strong chance he wouldn't be out the club next season. They've tried to keep him. It hasn't worked out. So that the important thing for them, as both of you have said, is to make sure the recruitment is right to replace him. So pressure on Ian Blease there. I know that they're looking at people, and we've got 1 or 2 pretty eye-catching signings lined up. They're being very coy about who they're looking at, but I think a 6 and a prop will be the priority. So it's going to be very interesting to see what the outcome of that is. And obviously they'll want to get Brad Arthur's future sorted out as soon as possible. Either way, really, with so much recruitment to do, they'll want to know who's the coach for next season. I think that'll do us as far as looking at last weekend goes. We now have a new preview show, which we'll bring to you later in the week, looking ahead at Super League Round 12. But in the meantime, as I always say, thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. like this video, subscribe to the channel, and please tune in later in the week to see what we think of this weekend's fixtures. Thanks again for watching.
Thanks for joining us. Please like and share, and we'll see you next week.